Hi everybody, good afternoon. I hope you're all well. My name is Katie Jacobs from CIPD. I've been hosting our coronavirus series of webinars, and welcome to our very first coronavirus webinar of 2021. It does feel a little bit like Groundhog Day, so I'm sure you're all feeling the same. This afternoon we're discussing a really important topic that I know is affecting so many of your people, but as well as that, I know it's affecting a lot of you personally. How can organisations best support working parents through this third national lockdown, with the schools once again closed until at least February half term? Joining me to share their insights and experience, I've got a really great panel of experts. I'm joined by Claire McCartney. Claire is Senior Policy Advisor for Resourcing and Inclusion at the CIPD. Dr. Heejung Chung is a reader in Sociology and Social Policy at the University of Kent, and she's been doing a lot of really pertinent research in this area. And last but not least, Laraine Kemp is HR Director for Business and Industry at Compass Group UK&I, and is going to share a bit about how, as a practitioner, they've been supporting both their frontline workers and also those working at home. Thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm just quickly going to run through the housekeeping as ever. This webinar is being recorded. It will be available on demand. The slides will also be available to download, and my colleagues will place where you can find those in the chat. If you'd like to ask questions, and please do, because we love to answer your questions, then use the Q&A function, which you can see at the bottom of your screen. Use the chat function if you want to share with each other, connect, share any experiences of how you're finding things, and please do get your questions in throughout. Do not leave them until the last 5 minutes of the session, when we won't be able to answer that many of them. A reminder that the CIPD Coronavirus Hub is there for you, and we're having content updated all the time on that. If you have a tricky legal issue that you could use some advice on, please do remember that CIPD members can access HR Inform's employment helpline. And if you use that for employment law advice, you will get an individual response. And finally, remember, as a CIPD member in the UK and Ireland, you are now provided with free wellbeing support via a helpline that's staffed by therapists and a Health Assured app. So do remember to look after yourselves. It's a really, really stressful time at the moment. So that's the housekeeping done. I'll just quickly set the scene a little bit around what we're going to be talking about. On the 5th of January this year, all primary and secondary schools across the UK were forced to close once again, apart from providing on-site education for the children of key workers. Many people were once again plunged into a bit of a homeschooling nightmare, attempting to juggle work and childcare. We know that lockdowns and school closures have a really big impact on working parents, but particularly mothers. A recent survey by the TUC found that 1 in 6 mothers, and mainly those on low pay, had to reduce their hours at work as a direct result of the school closures, some being forced out of the workplace altogether. Separate research by Working Families has found that 1 in 5 working parents felt they had been treated less fairly at work because of their childcare responsibilities since the onset of COVID-19. It's really, really vital that organisations continue to support their people through this challenging time. And that could be everything from empathetic and supportive communications to offering additional flexibility where possible, extra leave, or the use of furlough. Employers can make a really fundamental difference to the experiences of working parents when they need it most. So we're going to hear from Claire, Heejung and Laraine, and then we're going to go into questions. So they're all going to present for a few minutes, and then we'll go into a bit of discussion. That's it from me for now. I'm going to hand over to Claire to kick us off. Thanks, Claire.
Brilliant. Thank you, Katie, and thank you so much for setting the scene there. So good afternoon, everyone. So many working parents, including myself, will be thinking, here we go again, about this latest period of school closures and having to balance work with childcare and home learning. I think it's really important that working parents are properly supported through this challenging period to reduce any longer term negative impacts on their employment, their career prospects, and also to make sure that organisations can retain valuable talent. I think whatever organisations do in this period, it's likely to have an impact on how working parents feel about their organisation in the longer term, as well as their motivation and, really importantly, their physical and their mental well-being at the moment, because they'll be under quite a lot of pressure. So my presentation is going to focus on some of the practical things and resources organisations can draw upon in this period to support working parents. But moving on, just to set a little bit of context, we know, as Katie said, the pandemic has had a negative impact on working parents. The pandemic has had a negative impact on certain groups. It's not been equal more than others, and working parents have suffered through this period. So, for instance, we know from data from ONS to do with the first lockdown showed that many parents had to change their work routines around childcare and that parents were at significant risk of furlough. Katie mentioned about lower paid workers, and we know that they will be particularly affected as only 1 in 10 low paid jobs can be done from home. So often it's those that can least afford it that are paying the biggest price. And definitely worth mentioning that working mothers in particular have fared badly throughout this period. So research from the Institute of Fiscal Studies and UCL showed that working mothers from the first lockdown were more likely to have lost their jobs since February than fathers, and were also more likely to be spending their working hours simultaneously trying to care for children or homeschool children. Single parents will be acutely affected as well, 9 out of 10 of whom are women and have less likely to have someone else to share the responsibilities of homeschooling and balancing work. And also, I think it's worth mentioning that discrimination faced by pregnant women and new mothers before the pandemic was high, and we know that from Bayes evidence, and it's likely to be accentuated by the pandemic. We know research from Pregnant and Screwed in the summertime found that 46% of mothers being made redundant blame a lack of childcare provision during the COVID-19 pandemic. So with all of this in mind, if we move on, we need to think about, well, how can organisations step up their support at this challenging time, as Katie said, when parents need support most? And we think there are 5 key areas that organisations can step up and provide support. So moving on, the first area, really important to follow the equality and human rights guidance around making sure that we're applying non-discriminatory practice in decision making around things like furloughing, redundancies and short-term working. The HRC have updated their guidance quite recently, so if you haven't taken a look at that, please do. It's a really useful tool for employers, and I'm including a link at the end of my presentation to that as well. But it includes information on redundancy procedures and selection criteria, and has specific sections around pregnant women and those on maternity leave, amongst other areas. So the second area that we'd really hone in is a supportive message from the top of the organisation. So to let working parents know that that senior leaders understand the challenges that they're facing and that they're empathetic and supportive. This will really help working parents feel valued, but also really importantly, I think it will give line managers greater confidence in supporting their individual team members, and line manager relationships with their working parents are going to be really important throughout this period. So the third area is making sure that line managers are talking through the different support options that might be available within your organisation. So whether that is talking about flexible working arrangements, so people might want to stagger their start and finish times, or work to compressed hours to help with juggling homeschooling and work, or it might be that they want to or need to, for a finite period of time, alter their role responsibilities to help. And indeed, if they are working reduced hours, they might want to look at working perhaps fewer hours over more days to help them balance their work and their homeschooling responsibilities. I think the most important thing to say is there is no one size fits all solutions, and that's why it's so important to talk to parents about what options would work best for them. People's challenges are likely to be very different depending on the age of their children and also their learning needs, so important to have those individual conversations. And if some of these solutions don't work, employers should also discuss with employees whether taking furlough would be the right option for them, or parental leave, or some unpaid leave and holiday might be helpful. And I think it's worth reminding people, I know a lot of my friends who are parents are completely unaware of the right to parental leave, where parents are legally entitled to 18 weeks of unpaid leave for each child or adopted child up to their 18th birthday, and there's a limit of 4 weeks for each child which can be taken in a year. So again, that might be an avenue, but that is unpaid. So I thought it would be helpful also just to share, if we move on to the next slide, some examples of some of the things that our members are doing in this area. And obviously there is no one size fits all, but it's always interesting to find out what's working for other organisations. So what we can see here is some organisations have implemented special leave, so reduced hours, which is not actually having an impact upon pay. For other organisations, they've actually introduced 5 days paid dependence leave to support their working parents. Others are giving the option of the ability to purchase additional leave and spreading the cost of that leave over the financial year. And then we've got examples of line managers really talking to working parents about their priorities, moving down non-time critical tasks, so that when parents are working, they are focused on business critical issues. Others are making really good use of calendars, so keeping clear times in calendars for parents to homeschool, and knowing that they won't be disturbed or expected to accept meetings within those kind of blocks within the calendar. So again, some useful ideas there from our members. So if we move on, we just highlight number 4 of our list of stepping up support. So, and that's making sure that line managers are being inclusive and supportive. And clearly this is going to be beneficial for all employees if line managers are taking this approach. And really it's about the principles of good people management. So just holding regular one-to-one conversations with employees to discuss work, but yes, any personal concerns that they might have, making any adjustments that are needed, such as flexible working at home or in the physical workspace, setting really clear objectives and managing by outputs rather than inputs, so that there's a trust-based relationship there. And I think the other area to highlight for line managers is maintaining a focus on employee health and well-being, and making sure that employees are doing what they can to look after their own well-being through this difficult period. So the 5th area, which segues in quite nicely to that, is drawing working parents' attention to any health and wellbeing support that you have available within the organisation. And you might have been communicating this constantly through this period, but it never hurts to keep on communicating that. And so larger organisations may have access to things like employee assistance programmes or occupational health, and that could certainly be beneficial to working parents who might be understandably finding the current circumstances challenging. And smaller organisations might not have those resources, but can certainly provide links and information around useful charities or support services that parents could potentially access. Overall, I think it's really important to remind all employees about the importance of maintaining their physical and their mental well-being. And even though working parents are under a lot of pressure juggling work with homeschooling, it's so important to take regular breaks, get fresh air and exercise. Simple things like that would make a big difference. So just going to move on now to the next slide. And we've been interested to find members' views on what further support, if any, might be helpful from the government during this lockdown period. And so we included a poll in our e-update last week around this. And you can see there's most support for this right to work flexibly, so in the lockdown period, so having much more flexibility. And obviously this is something that we're very supportive at the CIPD, and wanting as much flexibility for employees as possible. Also, there's support there for the right to be put on furlough. So almost half of our members, 46%, are saying that that should be in place. And then there's also just over a third that would like to see up to 2 weeks of paid parental leave, which would be government funded. So only 7% of our members saying that no extra support should be provided. So we're continuing to consult on this, and if you've got any views, we'd be interested to hear those. So I'm just going to finish off then by flagging some of the resources which I think would be helpful for you with regards to working parents. So some of our resources and some other resources. So we've got a link there to the CIPD Supporting Working Parents blog, which will give you some of the information that I've been talking through today. Lots of resources around flexible working. We've got a bit of a kind of a hub around flexible working, so do take a look at that. Also, I haven't spoken about this in this presentation, but we have support around parents returning back into the workplace. And I do think it's an interesting point. Maybe we could pick this up in our discussion, but parents that have been on parental leave will need support coming back into the workplace, which is going to look and feel very, very different potentially to when they went on parental leave. We've got maternity, paternity, shared parental adoption leave and pay Q&As on the website, so do take a look at those. And I've also linked, as I said, to the EHRC guidance and also a really useful toolkit for fathers or partners in the workplace that Birmingham University created. It's free to access, and it's something that we also contributed to. So I'm going to leave the presentation there and hand back over to Katie.
Thank you so much, Claire. Really, really useful context setting and some worrying statistics, as somebody put in the chat, but some really, really great ideas there as well. Got a couple of questions in. Please do keep them coming. We'll pick them all up at the end of the presentations. And if you've got anything you want to share with other attendees on what you've just heard from Claire, then do place that in the chat. I'm going to hand over to Heejung now, who's going to talk about how to support working parents during this lockdown and why it's a little bit different. Is it second time or third time around? I'm losing count, but over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's great to kind of pick up from Claire, because a lot of what she's already mentioned kind of mirrors on what I'm going to be saying. I'm an academic, so I'm going to probably go a bit longer than maybe my allocated time, but there's a couple of things I really want to say. And one of the things, before I don't have enough time, I think the key thing is for managers to understand what is the most important thing once we finish this lockdown, once we finish this pandemic. Because I think at the moment, because it's such a firefighting stage, people have a knee-jerk reaction to try to just get things done. And that's the same for managers and same for workers. So in a way, when you're in a hurry and you need a bit of a time to step back and reflect on what is the crucial things we want at the end of this, and what are the key things. It's about talent management in terms of keeping people able to work after this when we have that recovery period. And I think that's just one of the things I want to start with. Next slide, please. So already Katie and Claire already mentioned some of the background stats. And I just wanted to mention a couple of things about lockdown and parents, working parents. And of course, for working parents, the really difficult thing, especially given that nurseries are open, is about primary and secondary school children, especially primary school children, parenting primary school children. Things are different. The lockdown is completely different from the first lockdown in that there's a lot more home learning that is being asked of parents. The government has mentioned, without any support given to parents or teachers, that they have to do a minimum of 3 hours. Talking to parents, this is more like 6 hours of work, where you need to, especially for younger children, sit down with them and do the preparatory work as well. There's a lot of more fixed online lessons, which means that children need to be online and parents need to help them go online twice, maybe up to 6 times a day, even maybe more. It's also different because it's winter. You can't just get children to go outside and play on their own at the moment because of the weather conditions. There has been already existing burnout because we're already kind of a year into this lockdown. So, for example, the TUC report noted that 90% of mothers said that they have felt anxiety and stress during this lockdown period. And this is kind of mirrors some of the data that I've collected with the University of Birmingham team, where it was especially the mothers, even in the first lockdown, who have felt incredible amounts of conflict and stress. And this lockdown is just adding on to that without much relief in the meanwhile. So next slide, please. So what can we do for these parents? One of the things, and Claire's already mentioned it, is that we need to keep things flexible. So providing parents the capacity to work from home, as well as have flexible schedules, will help them manage the two together, especially given that, you know, some of the school tasks are very fixed in nature in terms of when they need to get done. So what we have to do is try to enable workers to kind of work around those schedules, given that school schedules may not necessarily be that flexible, and they are not. Now, worryingly, a recent Observer report just yesterday mentioned that a lot of workers are now being asked to come into work. And of course, Katie mentioned that some of these are jobs that cannot be done at home, but a lot of jobs are. And I think this is something that we need to think about. What is more, when we say flexible working, that doesn't mean just giving the access to flexible working arrangement. It means that we have to put work and meetings to, or possibly onto a minimum, so that people can work around them. So for example, don't have online Zoom meetings all day. Keep them to a minimum, keep them to certain periods, especially that enables people to take part. We'll possibly make them maybe have an online document where you could collaborate without having to do things synchronously. So it's also another thing about flexible working. Flexible working in itself isn't just having the arrangements there isn't enough. People will be afraid of the stigma that comes with it, especially when you're asking to do these things for care purposes, because there is a huge level of flexibility stigma that existed prior to the pandemic. So communicating clearly that this is for the benefit of the company that you do this flexibly to ensure productivity outcomes is really crucial, so that people don't see this as some sort of a gift or something that they need to reciprocate, but something that we're doing this so that we could weather through this crisis together. And finally, trusting workers to know when and how and where to do their work. So CMI report just recently also mentioned that of those who had used a lot of flexible working arrangement, it's especially the managers who have trusted their workers to know what they're doing that benefited most. And these are really crucial things. Next slide, please. But I think that's also not enough. And this is something Claire mentioned, which I think is worth repeating, is that at the moment, workers are doing 3 jobs, right? We're parents, we're teachers, we're workers and cooks and cleaners, etc. Although I understand fully, and this is something really crucial, that the government has not done enough to actually support parents or teachers as well as workplaces and employers, to ask workers to do everything as normal is a bit asking too much. So in a way, this is a good time to reflect on what is really essential work, what is really crucial to meet the kind of key KPIs for the team and company. And in that process, rather than the managers kind of deciding what is most important, possibly having the KPI in mind, let the workers choose what work is crucial, what is essential to really meet the goals of the team. And I think at this point, as long as some of the key work is done, I think it's also great to think about letting workers work shorter hours and not micromanaging them to stick to the hours that, are you doing 40 hours a week? That isn't really necessary it's actually going to lead to much more bad outcomes. What is more, actually, parents are, working very, very long hours at the moment, trying to fit everything in. And the communication and the message that needs to come in from for managers is actually that we don't want you to work very long hours. You working very long hours is going to result in bad outcomes for yourself and the company, especially because you're going to be more stressed, you're going to be unproductive during the hours you work. So please don't work at 1 a.m. in the morning. Please don't go, and completely stretch your kind of work day so that you're working every time and all the time. And next slide, please. And again, the problem with forcing workers to work harder now is that this might actually result in a longer lockdown. I know a majority of people in the attendees are majority are women. I'm assuming a lot of them are actually working parents and working mothers. And one of the things that shocked me this lockdown, is that there has been like 4 or 5-fold increase in the number of children that are going into school during this lockdown compared to March. And why is that? One is because the definition of key workers have changed. but also it's because a lot of parents have already been, stressed, and they just cannot cope without having the school's childcare, available, support available. And, again, this is because, there hasn't been anything else done. So people are left with no other choice but to send their kids to school. Now, the problem is that the more this happens, the longer will our lockdown be, which means that it's a vicious cycle of the longer the lockdown, there's going to be more stress for the companies. There's going to be huge damage for the economy. Yet we're doing it because, in the beginning, there has not been enough support, and workers are pushed to do as much or even more compared to before. And then we're going to just be in perpetual lockdown process. Next, please. I'm sorry about the small letters in this slide. And again, coming out of it, I think one of the key things to mention is that we need to really think about how this is impacting. We say working parents, but a lot of this is to do with working mothers. Working mothers have been under, they've been doing the brunt of the homeschooling and the additional housework and childcare. And due to that, we've seen so many statistics about, women losing their jobs, women thinking of leaving their jobs because they just cannot manage. And there will be an exodus of women out of the labor market, as well as leaving a long-lasting scar in terms of career progression and mental health. So one of the things that we need to think about is how can we protect women and mothers from these unfair competition? Now, one of the things, as I mentioned, is that especially when people are working from home, sometimes, especially those without care or any other responsibility, they might actually end up working much longer because, you don't have the commute, you actually have the quiet, so you actually end up doing more than before. And this is actually a pattern we have seen, for example, with more tangible outcomes, such as in academia. A lot of academics who do not have any care responsibilities and have been working from home actually been more productive. Now, how are you going to make those competition lessen during this process is something that we need to think about. And again, this it's a bit difficult for just individual companies to deal with because it isn't something that without government sufficient government support, this isn't something that managers alone can kind of deal with. Let's say okay. Okay, next slide, please. And just as a final ending point before I finish, it's just about thinking about other issues. So for example, there's a big, huge push about trying to get childcare workers, including teachers and nursery workers, to be prioritized during for the vaccine. And Chris Whitty explained that because they are not at risk in terms of for death due to COVID, they are not going to include them. But again, the impact of not protecting these workers and the impact it has on the economy, on workers, is so huge that this is, again, something that as managers or employers, you need to think about in terms of what makes sense for the economy and going forward in terms of in terms of work. Next slide, please. I think that was the final one. Yes, that was it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was really brilliant. Somebody said in the Q&A we'll come to later, a really refreshing take. So thank you very, very much for that. Just a couple of housekeeping. Some people have got their hands up. I think the updated Zoom enables you to raise your hand, but I can't take any questions that way. So if you've raised your hand by mistake, that's fine. If you've raised it because you want to ask something, put it in the Q&A instead. And just to read a comment from David in the chat. This phrase, really good one. Everyone working at home needs to think whether they're working from home or living at the office, which I think is what many of us feel right now. I'm going to hand over to Laraine now. Lorraine's going to talk a little bit about how this works in action in an organisation that's got a mix of frontline workers and also support workers at home. So over to you, Laraine.
Thanks very much, Katie. Good afternoon, everyone. As previously mentioned, my name's Laraine Kemp, and I'm the People Director Operations for Compass Group. Could you just flip on to the next slide, please, Christian? just a little bit of background on Compass. I think probably a lot of people on the webinar have heard of us. We are a people business, and we have in excess of 40,000 employees across the UK and Ireland. And our priority during this period has really been how to look after our colleagues. And to do that, we've put a number of solutions in place that I will talk through with you this afternoon. The vast majority of our employees are frontline workers, and they are really supporting the country's response to the situation we find ourselves in. So we have a number of workers in our healthcare sector, defence and education sectors that are out there and day in, day out are actually supporting the UK. But of course, we've got to make sure that we support those individuals as well, and trying to juggle between the looking after their children, homeschooling, and actually their health and well-being as well. And that's where we've put a number of things in place. If I could move on to the next slide, please. So what have we done? Well, our brilliant workforce are actually key workers. And so therefore a number of our frontline employees have been able to access the school provision, but that isn't for everybody. And I think what we've also seen this time around is not all schools can take all the key workers. The priority is definitely for the direct NHS workers. So that means that it has provided some challenges for our employees. So we've provided support in other ways, and we talked a lot, Claire has mentioned about flexible working. We're able to offer flexible working for both our frontline employees and our home workers, given the scale and breadth of our organisation with numerous sites across the UK. With regards to our home workers, we encourage them to work the hours that suit their personal needs. And by that, I mean not trying to juggle both, but blocking out time throughout the day to make sure that they're making time to support their children in homeschooling. We've, given a directive that no one should have a Zoom call or a Teams call for longer than 45 minutes at a time. But also to get the balance between making sure that people aren't then working stupid hours, 2 o'clock in the morning, etc. And to make that happen, we are ensuring that our leaders are communicating that out to our home workers. And we do that through our sort of communications platform, which is called Workplace. And so what we do, it's very similar to Facebook. And we have our MDs posting when they've gone for a walk throughout the day, when they've actually stopped working, when they've blocked out time to spend time with their children. So we're trying to get that message through, because we recognise that people who work at home are actually working longer hours, and we're trying to stop that as much as possible. And I think it was Claire's point that you've got to start at the top, and we're absolutely making sure that we do that throughout the organisation. So there's regular communication, regular updates, making sure that people take breaks throughout the day, but also take the time to support their children as well. With regards to our frontline employees, we have a situation in our organisation where kind of half our business is fully open, functioning, everybody is working really hard on the front line, and then we've got the other half of the business which is sadly closed in many cases. But those that are working, what we do is we give everyone, not just working parents, but everyone the opportunity to reorganise their shifts where possible. So we try to fit in and be as flexible as we possibly can. And again, we either do that on the site that they're working in, or we can actually look at alternative sites that would fit in with the working times that our employee would want to work, that helps them. We're also in the process of rolling out a workforce management system so that people will be able to choose their shifts themselves, so manage their times themselves to suit their home life. We are also obviously offering the opportunity for parents to take parental leave, and in some cases, yes, that's unpaid. We do give a period of time when they can take parental leave that is paid, and of course the opportunity to take holiday. Obviously, in this lockdown, furlough is available for working parents if they cannot work and they don't have any childcare, and we will consider furloughing an employee if that's what they want to do. We won't insist upon it. We will do everything to try and help and support our colleagues before we move to sort of furlough, and that would be the absolutely last resort. And then we're doing some other things to support as well. Next slide, please. And again, these are some of the things that we've found are really, really important for our workforce. So we have set up You Matter, which is all around our mental health and wellbeing support for our workers. We have a dedicated online portal called You Matter, and every employee within the organisation can access that portal. That has all sorts of materials available to point people in the right direction where they can get help and support outside of the organisation. We also, through that, have managers' webinars where we're training our managers in resilience, the ability to listen to our frontline employees, and how to become empathetic leaders, so that they really truly understand what their teams are going through and what we can do to support them. We have a number of volunteers across the business who carry out check-in calls with our employees. So it's an opportunity to catch up, have a conversation, maybe not even about work. I mean, it doesn't have to be about work. It's more about how are you? How are you coping? Is there anything else that we could do to support? And through that, they share their stories and tips, which we then put onto the portal so that across the business, everybody could access that information. Throughout the pandemic, we've got an employee assistance helpline. We've actually enhanced that. We've got more people sort of manning the helpline. We're providing further counselling sessions for all of our employees. We've added in additional financial advice to support anyone who has concerns from a financial perspective. And again, that's available to all of our employees. We have also introduced a Helping Hands Fund, and we felt this is really, really important because parents have the worry of homeschooling, trying to juggle their work, but then the financial aspects as well can become an issue. And what we've done is we've actually said to all of our frontline colleagues, if they need financial support, we will make a one-off payment to help them to get them through the pandemic. So that's available to all. They apply through our portal and give the reasons why they need additional support, and then we make a one-off payment to those individuals. We've also introduced a nurse helpline for all of our colleagues, really to sort of take the pressure off of the NHS. If our employees have any queries in terms of medical issues, they have the ability to talk directly to a nurse 7 days a week. And again, that's not just medical issues, it could be mental health issues, whatever, but that is available for everybody. And then we set up, again, right at the beginning of the pandemic, the welfare calls. And these welfare calls are to people both working, but also those colleagues of ours who are on furlough, who we shouldn't forget are, suffering as well throughout this pandemic. they'll be worried about their jobs. This is around reassuring them, explaining that, yes, we are going through a terrible time at the moment, but we believe our business to be up and running once we get through the pandemic. So these are a few of the things that we've actually put in place. We're always open to introducing new things to support our colleagues, anything that we can do. And I've actually, you know, even today, Claire, I've picked up a few pointers that you've mentioned that we can do more to support. But our priority is to make sure our workers feel valued, we retain our employees within the organisation. As Dr. Heejung suggested, you know, we've got to retain our talent. We are absolutely intend to do that and support everybody as much as we possibly can through these very, very difficult times. And that's it from me, Katie. So back to you.
Ian, thank you. Laraine. Yeah, we got a little bit of an echo on Lorraine's, so I might need to keep asking her to mute and unmute herself. So apologies for that. Thank you, Laraine. That's brilliant to bring it to life a bit. Got a few. Somebody's asked about the tool you use. Is it Workplace? That's a Facebook tool, right? And you've just taken that. Yeah. So Claire, it's a Facebook Workplace. Brilliant.
Yeah. Yes, it's Facebook at Work, basically, that we use.
I'm going to come to Q&A now. We've got some really great questions that have come in. Please do keep them coming. We'll take as many as we can. First one I'll put to you first, Claire. Rachel's asked, do we have an obligation to offer furlough for childcare reasons? Is this something organisations have to do? What is kind of our CIPD viewpoint on the furlough question?
Yeah, so it's at the employer's discretion. So, you know, as I was saying, there's no one size fits all. I think our view is to talk to parents to find out individually what would be best for them and, you know, for the team. And then if furlough seems like the best option, then we would encourage employers to offer that wherever they can. It's available to the 30th of April. As I said, at the employer discretion, the state funds wages up to 80%. And employees will need to have been on the payroll by the 30th of October 2020. I think what's interesting about furlough now is that it's flexible. So, you know, it could be one day a week. It could actually just be a few hours, actually, which could be helpful really for parents, you know, juggling work and school. So it's and it's also worth emphasising that it can be used for people on 0-hour contracts as well as agency workers as well.
Thank you. And then Heejung, you just put in the chat that the TUC has reported that 71% of mothers have had their furlough requests turned down. And what's your view on organisations making use of the scheme and the opportunities, challenges?
I think, you know, mothers going on furlough is probably what they consider almost their last step. Like, you know, they've considered all the negative consequences that may come from it, and they just couldn't cope. So I would recommend managers take a really kind of a really hard think about this, because it may mean that even if you're, you know, workers have to cope in some way or another. So they might have to cope in other ways, which might actually end up with detrimental effects for both the worker, but also the company, especially in the longer run.
Thank you. Laraine, a question for you here. Carol said, your organisation sounds excellent. How do you make sure that line managers don't stop or try and sabotage employee wishes to work more flexibly, especially around shifts? So how do you engage managers in this?
So again, we're running webinars for managers to explain to them, you know, how to support their employees. So look, with an organisation the size of ours, it is going to be very difficult to make sure that everyone is being supportive. But we have an opportunity for our colleagues to speak up and to contact us. So if there is a particular issue in the workplace, they have the ability to raise that to the organisation straight away. So we can do as much as we can, and we do to educate our managers in what we're looking to do to support our colleagues. If we have a situation where there is a one-off and a manager isn't being supportive, then we would hope and certainly encourage our employees to flag that to us as a company, and then we would deal with that accordingly. but it's always going to be difficult in a large organisation to make sure that everybody is complying.
Thank you. Claire, any tips on how to engage managers in this, particularly some of them might not have children, they might not kind of understand the reality?
Yeah, I mean, I think that supportive message from the top actually gives line managers license to think, actually, yes, we should be supporting our team members and our working parents. I think that's really crucial. But yes, for line managers, I think if they're holding regular one-to-ones with their employees, with their working parents, and they are encouraging them to talk about not just work, but personal concerns, then hopefully some of those issues will come through. And I guess if there's any silver lining to this pandemic, and I know it certainly doesn't feel like there is, it may be that organisations are gaining a better understanding of their employees' personal situations, whether they have vulnerabilities in their household, whether they have caring responsibilities for someone who's older or disabled, whether they're a working parent. So I would hope that greater understanding is leading to organisations being more compassionate and supporting line managers to properly support their team members.
Thank you. Heejung, I'm going to put this to you because it is about your sector, even though I realise that you are an academic and not an HR person. So somebody's asked, I work for a university and we're finding that this time we are getting much greater demand from academic staff requesting support for childcare challenges. They're not eligible for furlough. Based in Scotland, they're not seen as key workers, and they are needed to teach students. Classes are already scheduled. Do you have any advice on managing these cases? How do you balance childcare versus crucial and kind of time-bound work?
Thank you for that question. Actually, I really welcome the opportunity to speak about this. And this is not necessarily just on kind of as an example of what you could do as an organization. So with teachers and teaching it, because it's online, despite what others may think, it actually is more work than less work to teach online and have to communicate with students online. And the key is to not see this as an individual issue. So not kind of trying to manage that worker with the childcare demand, or, and again, in any settings that we're talking about, it's about trying to think of it as a group, as a team, maybe as a whole organization, as a whole, to understand what are some of the key things that need to be delivered as an organization. In higher education, this is about education and research, and possibly more important, and time specific, is about teaching. In that case, a lot of the auxiliary kind of activities that universities take part in needs to take a step back. We just have to maybe not think too much about the NSS, or some of the auxiliary, some of the kind of, it'll be nice so that our university ranking goes up because of that, but maybe put those things aside and reorganize your workforce so that those who can actually provide the key things that need to be provided, that is focusing on teaching. So that means that some of the administrative jobs, some of the administrative tasks have to step back and really focus on some of the key things. And again, this isn't just a message for universities, but in all sectors, about what is the key thing you need to do, what are you going to focus on, and then reallocate your workers so that to try to manage this as a collective issue rather than an individual case-by-case issue.
And have you got any advice, just follow up from that, on selling that into leaders who might be less progressive or understanding?
I think it's just a matter of, again, the leaders are thinking about, what are we going to do now? They are thinking very short term. I know I'm not trying to be saying to blackmail them, but talk about what are the longer term consequences. If you're going to be forcing that mother to work and do all the teaching without any support and just providing kind of lip service in terms of, we worry about your mental well-being, please take care of yourself, you're going to actually end up with really bad results in terms of the quality of the teaching, as well as the quality of the work that person can do, as well as possibly losing a lot of the very valuable staff that at the moment maybe you think that is not necessarily because of with the market decline, but in a year's time will be so crucial. And we know that it is so costly to trying to recruit people into these very certain roles. So what you think is beneficial in terms of profit now, in the slightly longer term, it's completely a big mistake for those top managers to do.
Thank you. So you have to take a long-term approach. I know Laraine said that you were definitely doing that at Compass. Question for you, Laraine. Laura's asked, I know you spoke about the benefits and changes being available to all employees, but with a lot of focus on working parents, have you found any animosity has bred within teams where other workers who aren't working parents, who perhaps or have older children, feel they're picking up the slack? If so, how have you dealt with it? What would you advise dealing with it?
That's a really good question, and the honest answer is that we haven't had that situation. We haven't had that animosity, because I think what this pandemic has done is created great teamwork, and actually everybody wants to help everyone else and be very supportive. I think there is a general recognition that, you know, trying to balance homeschooling, working, everything else is really, really difficult. And what we've seen is teams really pulling together. And I've seen that across the board, whether that's frontline teams pulling together or actually, you know, functional teams, those that are working at home have become much closer and far more supportive than they were sort of pre-pandemic, I would suggest. So I'm pleased to say that whilst it's a really good question and something that you would expect to see, I haven't actually seen that at all across the business. That's quite the opposite in actual fact.
It's good to hear. I mean, Claire, I'll come to you on that one. Something a few HR directors have said to me when we've been speaking is they're worried about resentment building, even if it hasn't started yet, that it might at some point. Any advice on how to get over that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it is a good point. And I think we probably need to be honest about this. If working parents are having to reduce their hours or go on furlough, then, you know, this is going to have an impact on the workload of other team members that aren't in that situation. So it's really important, again, that line managers are supportive around workloads of people that aren't working parents as well, setting realistic objectives, you know, looking at what is really time critical, what's business critical and what is not, and not expecting people to work you know, extended hours in this period where people will be full of stress and anxiety for a range of different, you know, reasons. So I think that is really important to acknowledge it, but also to make sure that line managers are properly supporting everyone in the team.
Brilliant, thank you.
Can I just come in on that as well? And I think a lot of these arrangements that people are being provided, because, you know, it's not just working parents. There are people who are caring for elderly. They might be caring for themselves, who are suffering from their own mental or physical health issues. And these arrangements are not just for parents or just for moms. And what is more is that providing these arrangements are not just to kind of benefit those specific workers, it's for the team as a whole. And especially, as I said, you know, in the longer term, like the impact, if your female mother colleague become, you know, burnt out and can't work at all, like that's going to impact the team much more. And of course, colleagues are, you know, with good friends, etc. And so it's not just impacting your workload, but it also impacts you emotionally as well as a part of that team. So I think in that sense, that kind of animosity possibly, as long as that communication is clear in terms of why these policies are provided, not as an individual gift, but as to ensure that the organization can stay afloat during these really troubling times, I think can, you know, as Laraine, you know, mentioned, need not happen.
Thank you. Laraine, David's asked, obviously don't have to give any numbers here, but you're offering such great support. What kind of costs has it incurred? Probably not, yeah, don't put a number on it, but how are you balancing the need to pay for all this support? How will it be recovered? How is it, what's the business case?
The reality is that we took the decision way back in March to invest in our employees and to basically make sure that we support everybody and we make that financial investment. I won't put the numbers on it. There is a significant cost, but we won't be looking to recover that cost. We've kind of taken the hit. It's the cost of the organisation. The benefit is really the long term. The fact that we have looked after our employees throughout this pandemic, we've put the support in place. The reality is that we believe that when we come through this, we will retain our great talent. We will retain the loyalty and support of our employees. And therefore, it's been worth that investment from the organisation. And so, yes, it's significant, but it's really for the long-term benefit. And that's what we've done. So there's no view about how we'll recover it or cover the costs into the future. It's a one-off investment we've made, and we believe that we'll reap the benefits longer term.
I think that's a very clear message that's come out of this session, is thinking very much for the long term rather than just making decisions like that because you think it's the right thing to do. Only got a few minutes left. I'll try and take one or two more questions. Claire, I'll put this to you. We have some high levels of toil and overtime at the moment, but employees are finding it hard to take the time back. How would you suggest this is tackled as overtime keeps increasing, even when we're encouraging people to take time off and reduce their hours?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good question. So, but it is giving people the permission to take that time off, you know, and that will come from their line managers as well. It would be a kind of a cultural thing. So if people feel, you know, that they'd like to take the time off, but their workload is too great, they're not going to do it. So I think it is giving them permission to do that, to, you know, to make that message quite clear. Maybe it might be extending the period of time that they're able to take that back as well, as things have changed, you know, with accruing holiday as well. But yeah, I mean, putting those boundaries in place as well, so making sure people aren't working really, really long hours, because everyone needs a break. And I think people need, you know, frequent breaks at the moment because of all of the things that they're dealing with.
Thank you.
Can I just add to that? So one of the things I'm really kind of passionate about these days is the shorter working week. And one of the things that workers tend to also, it's hard for workers to kind of understand themselves, because there's a huge level of insecurity and there's a lot of workloads. You just feel like you just have to keep, you know, get going at it. But I think one of the things, as Claire mentioned, that managers need to also mention that working shorter hours may actually be more productive and more beneficial for not just the worker, but for the company. And taking breaks, you know, a lot of, you know, empirical research and psychological studies show that making sure you have the full weekend, going away from the desk, etc., has a huge influence of how productive you are for the hours you work. So rather than doing overtime, again, encouraging, you know, keep, you know, bringing in that message of, we don't want you to do these very long hours because it's actually not benefiting the company, is something I would recommend managers to say.
Thank you. And somebody has put in the Q&A that they really appreciate your call for a different perspective on the whole working longer hours debate and measuring output, because it isn't humanly possible to do everything right now. I'm just going to put this question very quickly to you, Laraine. Naomi says that they use their intranet and company internal social media to deliver messages, particularly around well-being, but some staff just aren't engaged with being online, and then they complain about not being listened to. How would you recommend communicating best?
We use various methods of communication. So I talked about workplace, which is sort of Facebook at work. But you know what? We actually rely on some old-fashioned sending out posters and getting information out to our employees that way, because we recognise, you know, across our workforce, not everybody have the ability to go online, or indeed aren't interested in social media, that kind of thing. So we actually do have a combination, and we'll send out posters, we'll send out messages to be put up on the staff notice board for everybody, because that's the reality of how we get to communicate to all of our colleagues. And it's the only way that we can do that. We don't have the ability really to hit 40,000 people all via email or all via workplace or social media. So, as I say, we need to use a combination of things to make sure that we actually get the message to our frontline employees, even down to we'll put messages on pay slips, that kind of thing, reminding people when they earn their pay slip, there'll be a few lines saying, you know, you can get help and support, and pointing people in the right direction within the organisation.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid we are out of time, so I'm going to bring it to a close there. Thank you so much, Claire, Heejung and Laraine, for your really, really brilliant insights. Thanks everyone for watching, who put your questions in, some really thoughtful, interesting questions there that I'm really glad we've got the chance to answer most of those. Our next coronavirus webinar is on the 1st of February, and we're going to be looking at the topic of how you as people professionals can best support your staff with suffering from grief and bereavement. So do join us for that. But that is it from us for this afternoon. All the slides will be available, all the resources that we mentioned, you can download from the CIPD Coronavirus Hub as well. So that's it from us. Thank you very much and have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.